Hey there everybody, and welcome to D&D Doge's Emporium of RPG Horror Story Cringe. In today's episode, we have a tale about what happens when a dungeon master and a player don't see eye to eye, a story about a player that is punished for solving something early, and much more. But first, a message from Alice. Thanks, Allie. Now, let's get right into these stories. The One Who Didn't Actually Get to Play by Reddit user Madame Music 89. For context, I've played a lot of D&D. Most of it falls in the amazing and good, or just okay categories, until this story. I went on a weekend trip with some friends, and on the agenda was a one-shot for one of the nights that we were away. I couldn't make up my mind on what I wanted to play, so I came prepared with a few different characters. The session gets going. We're role-playing and having a good time. Then the inciting incident happens, a murder, and the party has been tasked to investigate and bring the murderer to justice. I was playing a rogue, and through some insight checks, I had a sneaking suspicion about one of the guys, so I tail him, super stealthily, because rogue. But then I failed a series of wisdom saves, ended up in the basement with some creature, the stairs just magically disappear so I couldn't escape, and even though another party member with a passive perception of 29 came looking for me, apparently they still couldn't hear me screaming for help before I got one hit killed by the creature in the basement. It was a bummer, and I'm a bit annoyed, because there was no good reason for any of it to happen. But whatever, no big deal. I have other characters with me, so I let the DM know the name, class, etc. for my new character. I'm prepared, so this should be easy, right? For 2 hours, the rest of the party just went on with the adventure. At one point, a friend, who is also a DM, interjects at a good time to introduce my new character, but our one-shot DM says, "After the break, we'll get her back in." I literally left the table for 45 minutes, and no one seemed to care, and I returned just in time for the break. We introduce my new character, and 20 minutes later, we wrap up the whole adventure with a pretty little bow, and I never played D&D with those people again. Oh, and by the way, the murderer was the guy that I tailed at the beginning, so I guess that explains why I was insta-killed. Yeah, I think that DM should have handled that a bit differently, especially for a one-shot. If anything, the DM should have just had the guy that OP was tailing do something a little less drastic, like hold person on him, not have him be one-shotted in some basement with no chance of escape. What the DM did do just tells me that he had a set narrative for it, which, I mean, yeah, it's a one-shot. But there should still be a little wiggle room that doesn't require you to kill off one of the players for figuring out something early. It kinda reminds me of Glass Onion in a way, for those of you who have seen it. So yeah, I think I would have been a bit peeved as well. Let's move on. I'm Not Going to Fight Windmills by Reddit user Mr. Tricorder. I don't know what to make of this. So let's get internet strangers in on this. I'd been playing Curse of Strahd with a paid GM for almost a year, and it was absolutely wonderful. So, of course, a follow-up homebrew campaign was offered, one with gruesome horror and maximum player agency. Our characters are dead, and they are now stuck in some form of hell. Why not? Or so I thought. We've been talking about themes, characters, and whatnot to prepare for the horror. Near the end of session 0, the GM dropped the info. We were going to use individual XP rather than milestones. Some players voiced concern, but the GM mostly shut them down with, "To explain all of this would be a spoiler. It's going to be part of how this world works." So the players accepted that and moved on. Early on, we ran into some bandit types, and suddenly some XP dropped. In this world, you only gain XP by killing people, and sort of sucking up their souls. I voiced concerns that this will incentivize murder hoboing, and she confirmed that this is indeed the design choice that she made here. She wants to incentivize murder hoboing and make the character struggle against the temptation to murder people for power. I wasn't really satisfied with that. I mean, every player actually stated that we wanted to stay the hell away from murder hoboing, no matter what. Though she reiterated that the goal is not to teach murder hoboing to players, but to highlight the morality of the situation, and to make the characters find other ways to succeed, rather than kill. I didn't know what to say to this, so I just went along with it. We pushed further into the campaign, but since we refused to kill people and eat their souls, the game kinda became a drag. 6 sessions of level 1 slow crawling, without any noticeable progress, and I had had enough of that. So I talked to the GM again, asking if this is even a viable playstyle for this campaign, or if we need to rethink our approach. I was told that there would be other rewards to look forward to, and if I continued down this path, I might miss out on a good chunk of XP, but I might gain other advantages, such as followers or faction standing, to make up for the XP gap. To be honest, this already took a big chunk of enthusiasm out of the game for me. The crapsack world we played in was so full of crapsackiness that I didn't look forward to gaining any standing with any of them, and the NPCs were so crappy in general that I didn't want them to be my followers. We had a selection of Oppressive Megachurch, Mercenaries Are Us, Fantasy CIA, Fantasy Board Collective, and Mr. I'm going to steal your XP when you support me. If there were more, I don't remember. The information we gathered was always biased, unreliable, and sometimes just an outright lie. I realized things might be a little confusing at this point. Out of game, the GM pointed us to a quest that would grant us XP. Driven by hope, I gave it another chance. So we accepted another quest, some mercenary work for the megachurch guys. We were compromising on our anti-murder stance, and decided that this time we were going to kill a bunch of strangers for money. And quite frankly, since everyone was terrible and the faction we were about to fight against sounded bad enough, I felt confident that we'd be up against some baddies anyway. So that just might make it okay-ish. But when we arrived, the GM revealed that these people are my player character's old drinking buddies. On site was some MacGuffin that gave us a bit of XP anyway, at least, so there was hope. Half the group was level 3, with some now level 2. Progress. We decided to try to convince my buddies to our cause, but the chances were slim. We were prepared to break contract and join their faction instead, but in order to do that, we would need some protection, since the church will probably kill us the moment we show up anywhere. My old drinking buddy NPCs got understandably angry, but when I told them, hey man, times are tough, we struggle and we try to make the best of it. We don't like the church anyway. How about do a double cross with the help of your employer? But the NPC just went on a rant, calling me an immoral traitor and murderer for even entertaining the idea, and he clarified that the next time we meet, we would be enemies anyway. Confused and unable to cope, I kept quiet. This left the aftertaste of a rug pull in my mouth. Either I murder my friends, or I become the target for a hyper-influential organization that might as well kill us on sight the next time we show up. That's what you get when you want to level up, I guess. Greedy me. Another player threatened the NPC with the full might of our employer, and that worked. So they went away. But, of course, they told their commander, and the next day she rides to us on a dragon. You now spy on your employer for me for a whole month, or else my dragon is going to eat you, the commander yelled at us. I played a fighter, a simple soldier turned adventurer. I do not have the skills nor the energy for prolonged spy quests that I don't want to do. This quest surely set me up to fail, so I contemplated on just coming clean to the church anyway. But it never came to that, since right after that, my last quest happened. Some NPC slides us the information that there's a missing girl in the city. She went into a slum and no one is caring enough to look for her. Hell yeah, let's go. Although, we get a warning that in the slums, people are friendly and there's no need for weapons and armor. Even more so, that it would scare people and make the task of asking around impossible. So I doffed my armor and left my weapons at home. It turns out that this quest was a trap by the Fantasy Board Collective. They lure in gullible people to assimilate them this way. So the session ended with a comment by the GM that this encounter has TPK'd some groups on other tables that she runs. Some wrap-up talk happened, and she elaborated that, yes, this was a ruse all along, and we fell into a trap. I talked a bit with the GM after that, and the general tone was, "But look at how much good RP we're creating," and a hyperbolic, "You don't play D&D to win." She seemed to enjoy how tragic everything around my character was, and that a tragedy where the hero ultimately fails and achieves nothing is an interesting story to follow. But I think a game without the chance of success is meaningless, no matter how good the roleplay is. No matter what we do, we're being set up for failure anyway. I'm not going to fight windmills. That's the role I was assigned, but not the role I wanted. Well, anyway, that was it. So I left the table. I think I agree with OP in the aspect that campaign does not sound fun to me at all, and I wouldn't want to be in it. Though I will say it sounds interesting, and I'm sure some out there would love to play in something like that. Which begs the question, why the hell did OP stick with the campaign if it wasn't fun for him at all, let alone pay for it at the same time? Maybe it was just some sort of sunk cost fallacy that kept him coming back or something. Anyway, this is just another lesson of why it's sometimes a good idea to just quit a campaign if you aren't having fun, especially if you're paying for it. Let's move on. You get all types when looking for players to join a campaign you're running. By Reddit user Arath Droid. A while back, I had just ended a campaign and had a free slot to start up a new one, so I went to Reddit to look for people for the next campaign. One response was from someone whose Reddit comment history seemed alright, so I contacted them to talk further about the campaign. They insisted on a voice chat, which I was fine with, since typing is generally slower than talking, but they kept putting it off until their boyfriend was available for the call. Not too odd, since they said that both they and their boyfriend were looking for a campaign. Well, we start the call, and it starts off decent enough. We talk for a couple of minutes about what the campaign was going to be, and then they said that they had a few questions. Fair enough, but after the second question, it started to feel like they were reading off a script. They'd ask a question, I'd answer it, and they'd say, okay, and then pause for a moment as if they were taking notes, though that alone is not necessarily a bad sign. They asked me how long I'd been a GM for, what systems I'd run, if I'd run this campaign before, etc. All with, okay, and a pause afterwards. But after a few questions, it started to feel like I was at a job interview for a campaign that I was willing to run, for free. And then they asked me, "So, what would you say your greatest liability is as a DM?" With me barely holding back my laughter, I ended the call, but not before they said that they would get back to me in a couple of days. It was more like a week before they got back to me. But the campaign had already filled up and had its first session by then. I still see them from time to time on various looking for game channels, looking for a campaign to join, and I hope that they do find one someday. But at any rate, they do have a bright future ahead of them in middle management. Man, that last question those player applicants asked gave me flashbacks to interviewing for jobs. Seriously, I always hated that. "Hey, we know you're probably a bit nervous at this interview, and we know that you're trying to prove why you're right for the job. But let us ask you about why you suck." And when OP said that they have a future in middle management, I have a feeling that they're already there. Let's move on. And before we do you have a story that you would like to see read on the channel? If so, be sure to post it to the DnD Doge subreddit, and who knows, it may just end up in a video. Much like this following story. My first DM sours 2 campaigns with his chaotic antics. Submitted to the DnD Doge subreddit by Reddit user Jimmy Locksmith. This story happened years ago when I was somewhere in my early 20s. It was a D&D game with a few friends of mine by the names of Money, It, Quacky, and Shade, our DM. All names have been changed. Shade was kind of an odd guy. He was substantially older than us, somewhere in his mid-30s, while we were all in our late teens and early 20s. We all played in his apartment, where he usually kept the lights out except for one blue light used to illuminate his entire living room. He was the one who introduced me to D&D, and I immediately fell in love with the hobby. Unfortunately, since I was new to it, I couldn't recognize the red flags. He would start us off in a hole, half buried, or in some weird situation without anything, not even a stitch of clothing on our backs. No equipment, no backstory, nothing. My friend Money, a guy, played a female elf wizard. Shade did his best to sexualize Money's character, most notably giving our characters an offer for half off at an elf shop if he could bet her. Money and I were not cool with this, so we turned it down. Again, I was new to the hobby and didn't recognize the red flags. Things took a turn when Shade got a girlfriend. At one point, our party split. Shade offered to run mine and Money's game, while I ran its and Quacky's game separately. I jumped at the chance to DM and ran their game. In actuality, Shade did this so he could ditch our game and go hang out with his girlfriend in the other room whenever he wanted. Our games were vastly different. I put a lot of time into it outside of the sessions and had a cool story and a decent BBEG. In his game, there was no real overarching plot, and the storylines, I would come to find out, were largely taken from video games he played. He made up everything on the spot. No notes, no preparation, nothing. The biggest red flag, looking back, was when he introduced his DMPC, also named Shade. Yes, he and his character had the same name. His character was several levels higher than us, had a massive amount of HP, and 2, I kid you not, 5d20 swords. He was dark, brooding, and super edgy. He wouldn't say anything and would silently judge the party and our actions. At one point, the party killed a bear and wounded its cub. Shane did not approve of our actions and demanded to know what we were going to do about it. My rogue decided to mercifully put it down, but before he could, Shade attacked and killed him. Shortly thereafter, that game and the one I was running both fell apart. A few months later, we started up a new game. Money, once again, played a female elf wizard, while I played a male drow rogue. By this time, Shade and his girlfriend had broken up, and I think it affected him mentally. He wouldn't let us have our character sheets for fear that we would cheat, and took everything we said very literally. For example, at one point, I said, "I take my blade," referring to the sword my character was holding, and he told me that my character took the sword by the literal blade and cut his hand. Later, at some point, we were teleported to an inn, and everybody there soiled themselves when we teleported in. After he told us this, my character went to inquire about a room, and the innkeeper soiled himself again, and Money's character slipped on the feces and fell down a flight of stairs into another pile of feces. It soon became apparent that Shade didn't care about our fun and just wanted to tell a story for his own amusement at our expense. Soon after, we stopped hanging out with Shade, and he eventually moved to a state 800 miles away. Despite how bad our games became, both Money and I went on to run our own games, and I have become a forever DM for a great group of friends. I think the silver lining of having bad games with Shade is that Money and I learned what not to do as DMs, and our games are all the better for it. Well, at least OP and Money were able to get some good out of that experience. Though, as soon as Shade started doing things, like making the players injure themselves just based off of phrasing, and having the whole poop fest thing at the end, I would have piped up and asked him what the fuck. It's no wonder that group stopped playing with him entirely. I mean, talk about a shitty situation. Yeah, you see what I did there? Anyways, let's move on. I played with someone who had 20 different character sheets. By Reddit user, Consistent Possible 6. They would roll a d20 at the start of the session to determine which character they would be playing, with everything ranging from a kindly old goblin grandmother rogue, my favorite and the one I wish they would have just stuck with, to a fissionable artificer piloting a steampunk mech suit. It was pretty much a hodgepodge of every fantasy trope mashed together with off-the-wall cartoonesque creations, like a dwarf who was transmogrified into a floating talking shield. Needless to say, for our DM, it was a constant headache trying to prepare for sessions, not knowing what character this person would play. Not to mention, trying to build a world or story around this revolving door of characters who clashed with everything he was going for with his homebrew world. This player eventually left the group for separate friend drama reasons, but they were actually part of a larger drama before I joined that would take a much longer recap, though here's a sneak peek. It involved a character self-impregnating themselves, but this was what I experienced firsthand. While that is a lot of different characters to pull from, the main issue here is the DM. If it was overwhelming for the DM to do prep because this player did this, he should have just said no and to stick with one character. I mean, it's just as simple as that. As a prospective DM, that sounds like a nightmare to deal with. Then there's the sneak peek at the end there. I wonder if OP will post that one, and I'll be sure to keep an eye out for it. But that is all the time we have for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.